Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it and is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, visit our website at greenpill.network, where you can download the GreenPilled book, or you can join the Discord or become a member of your local GreenPilled chapter. Today on the show, my guest is Artorias, who's a co-founder of CultDAO and a Web3 and decentralization maxi. Artorias is the co-founder of CultDAO, which is a public good and DAO funding mechanism built to provide decentralized funding to decentralized projects and noble causes. And they're, I think, a really interesting project. The aesthetics of CultDAO are much different from the SolarPunk stuff that I usually work on and feature on this podcast. And so delving into the cypherpunk mimetic filter of calling a project CultDAO and trying to build a network around this idea of decentralized funding of public goods, but also with some interesting token mechanics in there. So CultDAO is always in my Twitter mentions and always doing provocative things in the space. And so that's why I wanted to have Artorias on the podcast to talk about CultDAO and the projects that they're funding and building a perpetual public goods funding machine. So a fun episode, only I think the second one that we've done with an anon, so we're going to be cameras off on this episode, but interesting content nonetheless. So without further ado, I give you Artorias of CultDAO.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
What's up, Artorias? How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. Can you tell us about CultDAO?
So the idea of CultDAO is to be a decentralized and public good form of DAO funding. So the premise of Cult is to invest into projects that are pushing decentralization or, a noble cause, or actively fighting against centralization. So the way it works is that there's a small transaction tax on Cults, buys, sells, and transfers. That goes into a treasury, and then when the treasury has reached a certain threshold, which is the equivalent of 15.5 Ethereum worth of Cult, you can then put through proposal for investment into a project or a cause that is, in the eyes of the person proposing, doing something to push decentralization in some way. So that could be whether it's into a new form of Web3 social media, or into, we've done charitable acts before as well, pushing mental health causes. But essentially, when the proposal is submitted by what we call a guardian, which are the first 50 stakers of Cult, and then everyone else below that is what we call the many. So the guardians can make proposals, and then the many can vote on them. The guardians themselves cannot vote. So the idea of that is to try and to de-skew the idea of whoever has the most money can push through DAO governance voting mechanisms. So when that proposal is proposed, everyone outside the top 50 of the Cult stakers can then vote on whether that investment should indeed be made or not. And then this all happens automated. If it goes through, 2.5 Ethereum worth of Cult is instantly sent to the dead wallet and burned, and then 13 Ethereum worth of Cult is sent to whatever the recipient is for that project. And then the idea being, when that project is either matured or the investment has matured, profits from that are brought back. They buy Cult off the market and then burn half of it and then send half of it to the dead wallet. Burn half of it and then send the other half to stakers. So it's kind of a staking rewards, but without any sort of artificial inflation of the supply through standard staking emissions, which is what we see from a lot of current DeFi and staking platforms. So essentially, the whole idea is to function as a public good that is helping to benefit causes that are pushing decentralization, while also providing a kickback later down the line where whatever that project is or that proposal is has matured. There are rewards that are coming back to cult stakers as an incentivization, as well as burning the supply of cult, actively creating kind of a hyper-deflationary mechanism to the tokenomics.
So I'm looking at CultDAO.io and app.cultdao.io, which has some statistics for the size of the treasury, which right now looks like is about 85 ETH, and the total fund sent is 1,400 ETH. Looks like y'all funded some proposals in the ecosystem. I wonder if you could talk about like the public goods that are coming out of the proposal system, and which ones are most exciting to you?
So there's a few that I'm pretty excited about. One of them is an investment we made into a project called Web3 Wallet, Sons of Crypto. So what they're building is essentially a decentralized equivalent of MetaMask. So they're building a wallet, but it kind of aims to be less centralized than what MetaMask is doing by relying on specific RPC endpoints and things like that. So that was an example of where we're trying to push something that's actively fighting against centralization and building things that are kind of helping the space become fairer and less reliant on singular points of failure, etc. Another one we've done quite a while ago, but they've just launched now, is Wistaverse. So what they do is they are providing a platform for people to be able to protest in the metaverse. So let's say you've got a protest that is for a cause that you're really passionate about, but it's on the other side of the world. Not everyone can afford to have their voices heard and go to a protest because they may not have the means to do it. But what this essentially is supposed to do is allow people to get together and kind of virtually attend a protest. And I think that's a really important thing for people to have access to, because it kind of opens up free speech and allows people to have their say, even if they can't afford to make the trip to go somewhere that's out of their means.
I'm wondering if you could tell me about the CultDAO Manifesto next. Whenever I interact with the CultDAO people on Twitter, they're always talking about how we should read the manifesto. So could you take us there next?
Yeah, of course. So the CultDAO Manifesto it kind of functions as the white paper of Cult. It does contain the tokenomics flow, but it's also kind of a narrative about how there's many different forms in which people might feel downtrodden and like they don't have their say, and the economy is not allowing them to be who they want to be, and the manifesto kind of touches on a lot of different things that people relate to in the way they feel their place in society. The idea is it's kind of a call to arms, but not necessarily in like a violent capacity or anything, but kind of a way to tell people that there are other people out there that feel the same way as you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like this. There are causes that can help us, and I think one of the things that a lot of people say to me is that there is something in the manifesto that kind of rang true for them, but it could be one thing that doesn't speak to another. But there's a lot of stuff in there that there's a lot of different narratives in there that kind of speak differently to different people. Like some people will be affected by mental health. There'll be some people that have been oppressed because of injustices, like if that's race or class, something like that. So it's kind of a way to tell people that there is a way that things could be better, and if we're trying to push decentralization, that's kind of a route to a fairer life.
Yeah, I mean, I found the manifesto to be quite striking in many ways. And it kind of feels like to me, CultDAO is this shelling point for people who care about public goods, people who care about social action. But it's kind of wrapped in this very strong mimetic filter of being called cult and this beautiful graphics, but that are also sort of much darker than the SolarPunk stuff that I typically feature on the show and traffic in it. And so that's why I wanted to feature it. Is that mimetic filter I think is strong, but when you read the manifesto, I think you really feel a sense of kinship with other people who believe in the same causes and believe in funding public goods. But it's much more, y'all are much more focused on anon, and I think like a much more lunar punk than something like Gitcoin or like the regen ecosystem that I typically spend time in. And so I'm wondering if you could comment on that. Was that a deliberate choice to have a strong mimetic filter at the launch of CultDAO?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've heard a lot of people have told me about the mimetic filter, and it's certainly something I hadn't actually heard the term before cult, but it's absolutely a thing. And like, you just know that when you put a logo like that on the front of something and call it a cult, you're gonna give connotations of what it is right off the bat. But yeah, as you say, a mimetic filter, the idea behind it being it calls out to those that are willing to look a little bit deeper on than not just on the surface of what it is and think, like the kind of person that thinks, right, that's called cult, I don't gel with that, that's not me. Those people, that they're probably not going to be the kind of demographic that you'd expect to get involved and be part of what cult is trying to do anyway. So it is that kind of filter. And I have to say, when I first heard the words CultDAO, to me it kind of felt a little bit, is this too much? Are people just going to think, oh, I'm not joining a cult? But it is a cult in a way that people are so passionately behind this cause. And I think overall, it has helped us it's helped us find our community and find the kind of people that really gel with the community and kind of fit the message and the vision. So it's definitely a deliberate effort to create that mimetic filter. And I think although there were people that have definitely been turned off by it and see it and think, oh, I'm not going anywhere near something called cult, overall I believe it has allowed us to create this community that are so dedicated. And I'm sure you've seen, I know you've been around and aware of cult for a while, not necessarily directly involved, but I'm sure you've seen how diligently the community are actively talking about cult, and especially on Twitter, it's such a strong community of engagement. Like when someone hits something that even remotely kind of connects with cult's message, everyone's on it, and it can get kind of intense for a lot of people. And I think that's kind of, maybe that puts some people off, but at the same time, if you're part of that, I think it's a very overwhelming and engaging movement to be a part of if you are in it.
Yeah, it reminded me of MolechDAO in 2019, just like the mimetic filter of like, Moloch is this like demon god of coordination failure, but naming your DAO after this creates this filter of like people who get in who understand that meme. And I feel like with CultDAO, once you read the manifesto, it kind of takes you past at least for me initially, like the cult thing I was a little bit taken aback by it, but when I read the manifesto, I was like, oh, I understand the mimetic shelling point here. And then, the second thing that I think that I thought was really neat was the tokenomics of cult, and the 0.4% back to the treasury as it trades is sort of an interesting way of creating I want to say like a perpetual motion machine for funding public goods. And it was kind of elegant. It was the kind of thing where I was like, oh, I wish I had designed that into DAOs that I'd built. So, whoever is behind Cult, whoever the founding team is, I can tell that they're experienced with tokenomics and creating mimetic shelling points. And so it seems like it's quite strong, and that, like you said, bears out in the engagement that you see on Twitter. When people start talking about public goods, I always see a bunch of cult people in my mentions.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a huge amount of inspiration from MolokDAO in terms of like the mimetic filter, and also just what it is. The MolokDAO was also, a DAO that's giving grants out. It's kind of different in that with Cult, you're not necessarily contributing your own funds, but it's coming from funds that are kind of collectively, not donated, but are collectively collected from people's interactions with Cult, whether that's buying, selling, transferring, or whatever. So it kind of gives people, I think it gives people a feeling of they are part of it, but they're not kind of donating their hard-earned cash in the same way. So there's maybe a little bit less kind of, I don't know the best way to describe it, but I mean, if you're donating your funds and then someone else is voting on where that should go, you might not like where that is going. You could be voting no, and it goes there anyway, and you could think, oh, well, I've just donated money to a cause I don't even believe in. But because it's funds that have got there just through transactions, there's not really any ownership over those funds other than what the DAO decides to do with them. I think that kind of helps with less of people thinking, I don't want to invest in that, and it's not fair that my money is going to this cause when it's not something I agree with.
Yeah, so it's like, it feels like it's not a traditional grant giving platform in the same sort of way. You've got like a combination of like it feels like a for-profit token cult, but also like a public goods mission. And I'm wondering if we could pull the thread of that on, in like the combination of financial benefits of like a token, but also like it feels like you have this sense of crypto moving towards a lower emphasis on direct financial benefits. I'm wondering if you could talk about the mix of motivations that people have for being involved in cult.
This is something that I have thought a lot about recently, and not even that recently. I've been mentioning it on Twitter Spaces that I've done for a few months, but that emphasis of moving crypto a little bit further away from what it currently is, which is kind of speculation and an investment vehicle, and moving it towards what are the benefits of owning that token and keeping it and using it for what it should be used as. So instead of having, at the moment, the cycle for a lot of people is put your fiat into an exchange, buy some tokens, sell them for higher, and then take that money back out of the exchange and buy yourself whatever you need in, IRL, in real life. Whereas I think if crypto really is going to succeed and become adopted by the masses, it has to be more than just an investment vehicle, because then you're relying on the volatility of it to try and make money. Whereas what we should be thinking is, I want to own this token because what I get from it is access to this or this. At the moment, the world is token gated by USD, by the dollar, by the pound, the euro. If we have crypto that is used for a purpose that is not necessary to make money or to up the value of it, can it be used as something that gives me benefits in my life that aren't necessarily tied to being financial? And I think that's something that I would love to see in the next 5-10 years, that emphasis kind of drawn out a bit more. It's kind of the way I think about ETH at the moment. When I look in my wallets, like the self custody wallets, I don't hold loads of ETH hoping that the value of it's going to go up. I have ETH in those wallets so that I'm able to transact and do stuff with the crypto I earn. And I think we need to have that mindset for other crypto as well. So let's say I don't think about Cult and its value of it against the dollar or against ETH, and thinking, I'm holding this bag of Cult, I want it to go up loads in value so that I can sell it for loads of money and then buy stuff for my family. I think of it like, this is my ticket to the governance. This is my access to the governance and my participation in the DAO. And when we get to that stage where we have lots of different tokens that they do different things, they give me different benefits in my life, but I'm not constantly thinking I need the USD value to go up so that I can do more things in my life outside of this crypto bubble. And as long as we're thinking that way, crypto is kind of its little bubble that is speculation. And that's what I'd like to see us move away from a bit more.
Yeah, I have sort of similar thoughts in, how can we just basically all of the financially motivated action in crypto is great because it creates a network effect around Ethereum and the assets on the Ethereum ecosystem. But this podcast and a lot of my work has been about how do we build more pro-social crypto movements, and I think that you get into really interesting space when you start to create social change, like Schelling points around social change and around values on chain. And I think that in a way that's what CultDAO is. Although the value valence I think is like slightly different than something that's more SolarPunk, where I spend most of my time. And so like the future of activism and social change on chain, I think is really interesting because of how consequential the financial system is and how global it is and how programmable it is in nature. And one of the reasons why I wanted to study cult was just because it feels like it's mixing those things in a way that I hadn't seen before. So it's quite interesting what y'all are up to so far. And I guess I'm not really ending on a question, but any comments on that before we move on?
Yeah, so the way I was listening to an episode you did a few weeks back. It probably, by the time this goes out, over a month back or so, but about hyperstructures. And I think cult kind of fits that, because you talked about Uniswap being a hyperstructure because it's kind of, it runs itself. It doesn't require input to do what it's doing, and everyone just uses it as its utility, which is what it does. I kind of think cult, maybe it's not quite there yet because it's not big enough or well known enough, but it can kind of get there in that it is a hyperstructure in the way that it doesn't have any developer input. It doesn't have anyone pushing the buttons other than users and the people that are proposing or voting. Everything is automated. So you've got the guardians that can make a proposal into an investment. They can just do that. Someone could buy whatever they need to be a guardian, make a proposal, it goes through, and then they invest in whatever project it is, and then it gets voted on, comes back, and it doesn't need anyone saying, right, let's allow that to go through, let's make this happen. It works automatically, and I think that kind of fits the description of the hyperstructure that you were kind of talking about in that previous episode, and that's the way I want cult to be viewed by other people. At the moment, the awareness for it isn't out there. Like it's too niche to be considered a proper hyperstructure yet, because it's reliant on the current community that know what it is and how it works. Whereas if we can continue growing it, make it larger, increase the audience, it can be used in that way, and it can be effective as a hyperstructure, in my opinion.
Yeah, so a hyperstructure being something that runs forever without maintenance or intermediaries. And I just love this idea of, I used to live in New York City, and these institutions that are in the city skyline are so consequential for the city of New York. And for me, the hyperstructure is kind of like the same valence of importance and magnitude, but it's imbued onto the Ethereum blockchain instead of into a physical city skyline, and it has the same like staying power that a traditional structure would have. And so when I think about Ethereum at scale, Ethereum in 2025 or 2030, it's going to be all these different hyperstructures that people can interact with, and the sum of all of them is going to be our experience in DeFi or ReFi or whatever the open source financial system is. And it's quite neat to think about where that is all going. And maybe my segue back into asking you a question is like, how can we make DAOs more successful, and where is CultDAO going? Where are y'all investing in the future of CultDAO?
So I think there's kind of two layers to that question that come to my mind. One being, how can we make CultDAO as a DAO more successful? And I think all that relies on is just awareness and and it being used. It just needs to be used. It's kind of been a weird time period for Cult because it launched in February 2022, literally as the bear market was, coming into full swing off the back of this crazy bull run we had at the end of 2021. So it's never really seen action in a bull run in that it hasn't just been like number up for the sake of number up, where like we saw a couple of years ago. So it's managed to do quite a lot in a short period of time in a market where it shouldn't really have done quite so well. It had like a huge run up in March, April of 2022, and what that did was filled the treasury up massively. There was like 1,500 ETH in there at one point, or 1,500 ETH worth of Cult, I should say. So we were able to make a lot of proposals, but the fact that the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023, maybe not so much the last couple of months, but it's been a very tough market, and it's been a very slow market for people to build and receive funding in. So we've invested almost, I think, going by the ETH value, it's nearing $2.5 million worth of investments into other projects. And undoubtedly, when you make an investment in a project, you don't expect things to come back straight away. There's periods of building, there's periods of projects going through maturity stages to grow. So we're expecting to see hopefully quite a lot of successful proposals come back over the next year, the next 2 years, while we continue to make other proposals as well. So all I really want is for those to come back and be successful, so people can realize this has come full cycle and it proves that it works. And I think that's all we really need to be able to send Cult mainstream, or crypto mainstream, like not mainstream, but as in to get the awareness out, so people. I believe it will be a success if people know that there is something out there that can fund their project that is pushing decentralization, and it's just about breaking that little box that we've got on Twitter. Like, we've got this incredible community of people that are so dedicated, but there's not enough people that know about it for it to be a proper hyperstructure in the way that Uniswap everyone knows how to use Uniswap because it is the way that you transact and buy and sell in your self-custody wallets. We want Cult to be the way that people think, this is how I get funding for my project, rather than be reliant on going to VCs that are going to hang them out to dry as soon as their tokens get unlocked. So that's what I want for Cult, and that, I believe, is what would make it a success.
And so when you say CultDAO goes full circle, do you mean that there's a proposal that is proposed and then passed, and then that project goes out and is successful, and there's some sort of return back to the CultDAO treasury? What does that full cycle look like?
So we have had that. We've had a few that have done that. There was a SHIB related project called Woofwork, which was like the TLDR of it was that it was like a Web3 LinkedIn kind of thing, or a Web3 Fiverr. And we had really great returns from that. That still pays out on a monthly basis over. It was a 12-month period, and I think that started like 2 or 3 months ago. But we got back like 2.5, maybe 3 times our investment on the first month. It had a good pump from the launch, and we were able to take a lot of profit from that. And we're still receiving monthly payments to the DAO from that. So we have had some that have come back, but we've done so many that are just growing and still in a period of building. Like Wistaverse, the one I mentioned earlier, they literally just launched last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. So that's one that we're really excited about in the future, and it's not one of the cases where you want a product to launch just so you can then get what you want out of it and be done with it. You kind of want to see them grow and also be a part of the project as a supporter, as a supporting community. So when I say full circle, I mean like having lots and lots of projects, almost like the first wave of proposals come through, come back and deliver what has been removed from the treasury and sort of put it back in there. And I think that's an ongoing process because there's no set timeline for an investment, and I know there's no right time that you can take profits and things. So it's just it's almost a waiting game, like knowing when you're going to get that return from all these proposals that have gone out. But we had about 9 months or so that we had proposals that we had nothing come back, and it was just one-way traffic. What I'm looking forward to seeing is when, we've had 110, maybe 120 proposals go through now, and we've had probably maybe 15, 20 come back. Some of them for losses. Not every investment is a success, but I want to see what happens when we have like 50, 75, 100 projects come back, and then we're in the stages of waiting for the next cycle, and I think that's when things will be really interesting.
Well, I just think it's neat to think about at scale what this looks like. And also, keep in mind my experience working with Gitcoin and them being a meta allocator to different projects in this space. I see the same sort of thing at CultDAO, although you are focused on public goods and you're actually generating a return. And it makes me wonder if that's like a more elegant way of setting up a DAO as opposed to just like giving away these grants for free. So it's neat to see another meta allocator in the space be successful.
Yeah, exactly. We obviously don't see ourselves as competitors because there's no competition. It's people should be providing funding for projects, and whether that's through Gitcoin grants or whether that's through Cult, I just see that as a good thing, because I also believe that Gitcoin has the right messaging behind it, and we're seeing the right kind of projects that come through and receive funding from them too. So it's the more funding that you have, and like you say, the meta allocators providing that for good projects, then the better the space will be for it.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I talk about with my other guests, like Carl from Optimism or Oren from CLR Fund, is that you've really got a plurality of allocators in this space that are offering grants in exchange for things that create social change. And at scale, it gets quite interesting to think about people who could launch a project and just raise on CLR Fund and Giveth and Gitcoin and Optimism retroactive public goods funding and maybe CultDAO also. And that plurality of funding, I think, creates a better Ethereum ecosystem for people who want to create social change. So it'll be interesting to see at scale how all these things interoperate with each other.
Definitely. And I think it can help move away from this reliance on a lot of people, a lot of projects that are reliant on VC funding, and they could have the lifeblood sucked from them because they've given away too much to a VC that's just in it for the money, and it can really harm a project in the long run. Whereas if you have funding from a lot of different sources, but they're all kind of allocators like Gitcoin, like CLR funds, I believe like the longevity and sustainability of a project is going to be much higher for receiving funding from these kind of projects rather than just traditional VC firms.
So take me to a world in which CultDAO is maximally successful. What kind of things do we see? You mentioned, like, do people have less VC funding when they're getting projects off the ground? But like maximally successful in the next 5 or 10 years, what kind of impact do you hope to have on the world?
That's a very tricky question. Because like Cult being what it is, it just needs to continue functioning as it is to be maximally successful. It just needs the exposure. It just needs the use cases. It needs people coming to it and receiving the funding. I think that can only be good for the space if we're limiting, or even with VCs, they're not necessarily all bad. People need funding, and people are willing to make the investment into these projects and give them a lifeline. But if we're allowing projects to be less reliant on traditional VC funding, and it's kind of spread more or skewed more towards receiving public funding from public goods, it kind of takes the power out of the VC funds, so it allows a fairer playing field, and it's also less reliance on, I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of like more, it's a fairer playing field because you're spreading the funding across more avenues and allowing more exposure as well off the back of that. Like with a lot of VCs, what you get is exposure to a network of wealthy individuals, but not necessarily exposure to communities and to other projects that are being funded as public goods. Whereas if you're receiving funding from Cult or from Gitcoin, you're naturally kind of inheriting support from a community because of it. So that community is then behind the success of your project, or is pushing for the success of your project, as opposed to just having a few people from a VC firm that really want you to do well because they're going to make loads of money from it.
Yeah, so it feels like more access to funding the most interesting projects, more democratized access, more decentralization, are some of the things that I heard in there. But I think that maybe the call to action for the listener is just read the manifesto. That's I think where you describe the type of world that you want to live in, or at least your theory of change from the existing world. So there'll be a link in the show notes to the manifesto that people can check out. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say?
Not I can really think of. I think all I'd say like you said, people I'd suggest to read the manifesto, or just type in Cult on Twitter and you'll find a lot of people talking about us, and there's a lot of good people that want change in the world, and we don't kid ourselves into thinking that Cult is going to directly change the world, but the more people you have with the right vision together, the further you have the chance of pushing that vision and bringing decentralization to the forefront of people's minds a little bit more. And ultimately, I think that can only benefit the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about building a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together, and that's the fun thing about building networks. And Cult just feels like a really strong meme, and I'm curious to see where it goes. So shout out to everyone in the GreenPilled network that's checking out CultDAO, and Artorias, thank you so much for appearing on the podcast to talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.